The grain fields of Vada Prime caught fire before anyone heard a sound. That was the part that stayed with Lena Sato long after everything else faded. The silence before the end. She had been walking the southern ridge that morning, checking the moisture sensors on the upper crop rows, when the sky above her turned a deep and ugly orange. Not the orange of sunrise, something hotter, something wrong. She looked up. 30 kilometers above the colony, shapes were falling through the atmosphere, long and dark and smooth, like needles dropped from the hand of something enormous. They left white trails that dissolved into smoke. The ground shook once, twice, then kept shaking in low and terrible waves. Lena ran. The colony of Vada Prime was home to 600,000 people, farmers, researchers, and the families of both. There was a small garrison on the east edge of the settlement. 400 soldiers, 12 patrol craft, a defense grid built to handle pirate raids or debris impacts. Nobody had planned for what came next. Nobody had thought it was possible. Colonel Ray Ashford was eating breakfast when the first strike hit the defense tower. The building 3 blocks away became a pillar of white light. Then it was simply not there anymore. His mug cracked from the pressure wave. He was outside in seconds, running toward the command post with his data pad already open, already sending alerts into every channel he could reach. The Vorath had come without warning, without declaration, without any of the contact protocols the Galactic Concord required. They were a reptilian empire from the far arm of the galaxy, old and powerful and deeply certain of themselves. They had decided that Vada Prime was resource-rich and its people were soft. They had studied humanity for 11 years before this moment. They watched how humans laughed, how they built colonies from bare rock and seed, how they buried their dead with ceremony and planted gardens over the graves. The Vorath had looked at all of it and concluded, they will not fight back hard enough to matter. The orbital bombardment lasted 4 minutes. It destroyed the defense grid, the garrison's air support bay, and the colony's main communications tower. After that, the Vorath troop carriers descended. They landed in the fields Lena had been walking that morning. Their soldiers moved in clean formation, efficient and practiced. They had done this before to other colonies, to other species. None of those species had recovered. Ashford did not have enough soldiers to stop them. He knew this. He made no attempt at a full defense because a full defense would have spent every life in the garrison within the hour. Instead, he split his people into small units and sent them through the colony's underground service tunnels with one mission: get civilians to the transport bay on the northern shore, get ships into the air, get people off this rock. He kept 60 soldiers with him to hold the Capitol building long enough to matter. Lena found one of those units in a tunnel beneath the market district. A young sergeant named Dow pressed a medical kit into her hands and told her to stay close. She did not stay close. She knew the tunnels better than any soldier did. She had grown up on Vada Prime. She knew which passages connected to the school quarter, where the children would still be. She turned left where Dow turned right and went in alone with a flashlight and the kind of fear that does not slow a person down, but instead makes everything very clear and very fast. She found 41 children in the basement of the primary school. A teacher named Boras had locked them in and was sitting with his back against the door when Lena arrived. He looked at her with exhausted relief. She counted the children twice, memorized their faces without meaning to, and led them through 400 meters of tunnel to the transport bay. Above ground, Ashford's 60 soldiers held the Capitol building for 3 hours. The Vorath pushed against them in waves, confused by the resistance, frustrated that this colony was not simply collapsing the way the models predicted. They had not accounted for the fact that Ashford had spent 20 years learning how to hold positions with very little. He had fought resource pirates in the Kell and Bell. He had once held a mining station for 9 days with 11 soldiers and a broken comm relay. He was not the soldier the Vorath had studied in their reports. None of his people were the people the Vorath had modeled. But the numbers were the numbers. By the end of the 3rd hour, Ashford had lost 40 soldiers and was running low on everything. He made the decision to fall back into the underground and sent his last working signal burst toward deep space before the Vorath could jam it. The signal carried 6 words in standard Earth military code. Varda Prime is gone. Come now. In the capital square above, Vorath High Warlord Gron stepped out of his command carrier and looked at the burning city around him. He was large even by Vorath standards, with a wide jaw and golden eyes that saw everything with the flat calm of someone who had never lost. He opened a channel to the Galactic Concord and delivered the announcement his people had prepared. Varda Prime is now a territory of the Vorath Empire. The human population will be relocated. Any military response from Earth will be treated as an act of war against a superior civilization and will be answered accordingly. He closed the channel. One of his officers asked if he expected Earth to respond. Gron made a sound that in Vorath meant something close to laughter. They will send diplomats, he said. They always send diplomats. 6 hours away at the speed of light, the signal from Ashford reached the edge of Earth's listening network. A young communications officer on relay station Toval read it twice. Then she picked up the priority line that went directly to the 7th Fleet. Admiral Dara Voss was awake when the call came through. She read the 6 words. She did not reach for a diplomat. She reached for the Fleet Deployment Board. The Galactic Concord received the news before Earth's public did. That was how the Concord worked. They had listening posts in every inhabited system and a council of 42 species that had over 800 years built a bureaucracy so careful and so slow that most wars ended before it could officially acknowledge they had started. They held emergency sessions. They drafted formal statements. They sent ambassadors. They were very good at talking and very accustomed to having the talking work. Ambassador Seller of the Marin Compact arrived at Earth's orbital station within 30 hours of the attack. She was tall and thin with 4 arms and a translator node that sat behind her left ear like a small silver shell. She had dealt with humans before and considered them a reasonable species, gentle in negotiations, reliable in agreements, slow to escalate. She came expecting to offer the Concord's standard mediation framework and to guide both sides toward a settlement table. The human official who met her at the docking port was Secretary Hal Brennan. He was a short man with gray at his temples and a career built on compromise. He shook all 4 of Sela's hands, offered her tea, and then said very quietly that she should be aware the situation had already moved beyond mediation. Sela asked what he meant. Brennan brought her to the strategic operations room. The room was not large, but the display filling its far wall was. Sela stood and looked at it for a long moment. She had attended dozens of military briefings from different species across the Concord. She had seen fleet displays for the Vorath, for the Gren Collective, for the old Sarathi before they dissolved. She thought she understood what military power looked like at scale. What she saw on that wall rearranged that understanding completely. Earth's 7th Fleet was already assembled in deep space, 14 light hours from Varda Prime. It was not 14 warships. It was not 40. The display showed 109 vessels arranged in a formation she did not recognize, using a tactical geometry that the Concord standard models did not cover. Behind the main fleet were supply chains, drone carriers, and ships whose classification her translator could not match to any known category. "What are those?" she asked, pointing to a cluster of smaller dark shapes at the formation's edge. Admiral Dara Voss answered from across the room. She had been standing at a secondary console, and Zela had not noticed her. "You don't need to know what they are yet," Voss said, not unkindly, simply as fact. Zela turned to look at the Admiral. Voss was not an imposing person physically. She was of middle height with short dark hair and the kind of stillness that made a room quieter when she entered it. But her eyes were doing something Zela had seen in very few living beings. They were calculating without any visible emotion underneath the calculation. She was not angry. She was not afraid. She was working. "The Concord urges restraint," Zela said carefully. "The Vorcha are a founding member. A military engagement of this scale could destabilize 14 trade systems. There are civilian populations on both sides who..." There are 600,000 of my people on Varda Prime right now, Voss said. Or there were. We have confirmed evacuation of approximately 90,000. We do not know the status of the rest. Sella was quiet. Brennan set down his tea. Ambassador, we are not asking the Concorde's permission. We are informing you of our intentions as a courtesy, because Earth has always operated in good faith with this body. The Vorcha attacked a civilian colony without warning or declaration. They killed civilians. They occupied sovereign human territory. He paused. We are going to remove them. Sella brought up the Concorde's standard response. The point about proportional force, the framework about escalation chains, the concern about setting precedent. She laid all of it out calmly, because that was her job, and she believed in it. Voss listened without interrupting. When Sella finished, Voss asked one question. Ambassador, how many species has the Vorcha Empire done this to before us? Sella did not answer immediately. We have records on 11 confirmed cases, Voss said. Dr. O'Riel. A woman at the far end of the room, young and sharp-eyed, pulled up a secondary display. 11 colony names, 11 species, all absorbed, relocated, erased from independence within a decade of first Vorcha contact. One of them was the Moran Compact's oldest trade partner. Sella looked at the list for a long time. Then she said, What do you need from the Concord? Brennan answered, Stay out of our way, and when this is over, be ready to hold a trial. After Sella left the room, Voss returned to the deployment board. Her chief of operations, a man named Aldrich who had served with her for 9 years, pulled up the fleet's readiness status. Everything was green, weapons tested, shields calibrated. The new adaptive targeting system had passed its final diagnostic that morning. Aldrich asked if she wanted to send a warning to the Vorcha before the fleet moved. We already did, she said. 48 hours ago when their ships entered Varda's orbit and we didn't hear a declaration. The warning was, do not do this. They did it anyway. She authorized fleet movement at 200. 109 ships began closing the distance to Varda Prime in total signal silence. No broadcast, no announcement, no diplomats. In the Vorcha command station above Varda Prime, Grun received a sensor report that something large was moving through deep space toward his position. His analysts could not get a clean read through Earth's jamming field. They estimated 20 ships, maybe 30. Grun was not concerned. He told his crew to prepare a standard intercept force and went to sleep. The Vorath intercept fleet came out of Varda Prime's shadow moon at full speed, weapons already charged. There were 42 of them. Sleek gray warships built for violence with layered shielding and forward gun arrays that could punch through most known hull materials in 3 shots. The Vorath had used the same intercept formation for 160 years, across dozens of engagements. It had never failed them. The formation was a wedge, the largest ships at the point, the fastest ships at the flanks, designed to split any incoming force and destroy it in pieces before it could reorganize. They flew straight into empty space. Nothing was there. The Vorath intercept commander, a broad-shouldered officer named Reth, stood at his forward console and stared at his sensor display. His analysts had tracked the incoming fleet on long range for 6 hours. 109 signals, large and moving fast. Now, at close range, the sensors showed nothing. Blank space, not jammed, not obscured, simply empty as if the fleet had never existed. Reth ordered a full-spectrum sensor sweep. His crew ran it twice. Then one of his junior analysts made a sound that Reth had never heard from a Vorath soldier before. A short, quiet sound of pure confusion. "Commander," the analyst said, "they are already behind us." Reth turned. On the rear display, 109 human ships had materialized from the dark side of the outer debris field, running without any detectable energy signature, completely cold and completely silent. They were not in front of the Vorath formation, where any logical fleet would have met them. They were behind it, inside it, already at engagement range on every Vorlag ship simultaneously. Earth's fleet had not moved to meet them. It had waited, dispersed across the debris field for 11 hours. Each ship powered down to near zero output, holding position with micro-thrusters only. They had let the Vorlag fly past them. Then they had simply turned on. Reth had time to open a general combat channel. He did not have time to say anything on it. The first volley from Earth's fleet was not aimed at the Vorlag weapon systems or the engines. It was aimed at the shield regulators. Every Vorlag ship was hit in the same location within a 2-second window. Not destroyed. Knocked open. Their shields dropped simultaneously across the entire intercept fleet, like 42 doors opening at once. The second volley came 9 seconds later, and it was precise beyond anything the Vorlag had encountered in combat. Each Vorlag ship was struck by a different type of weapon simultaneously, some by focused beam, some by kinetic impactors, some by a weapon type that released a localized electromagnetic collapse that shut down power systems without detonating reactors. No Vorlag ship was destroyed outright. Every single one was disabled. Engines dead, weapons offline, life support intact. The whole engagement lasted 11 minutes. Reth sat in his powerless chair on his powerless ship and tried to understand what had just happened. He had fought in 6 campaigns. He had seen the Grand Collective fight, the Sarathi at their height, the border tribes of the Outer Reach. None of them had moved like this. None of them had prepared like this. None of them had hit 42 targets simultaneously with 11 minutes of effort, and then simply stopped. A communication came through on emergency low-power frequency. Human origin, clear and unhurried. Vorith Intercept Force. This is Admiral Dara Voss of the Earth's 7th Fleet. Your ships are disabled. Your crew is unharmed. We are sending medical drones to any vessel that signals life support difficulty. You have our word that no further action will be taken against your personnel. We are proceeding to Vero Prime. That was all. No demands, no cruelty, no speech about victory. She simply told them what was happening and moved on. In the Galactic Concord observation room, 3 light hours away, Ambassador Sella watched the battle data come in on a delayed feed. She was not alone. 17 other species representatives had crowded into the room when word spread that Earth's fleet had engaged. They had expected to watch a battle. They had expected fire and chaos, and the back and forth of 2 forces testing each other. What they watched instead was something closer to surgery. The representative from the Davan Union, an old and careful diplomat named Cho who had observed 40 years of galactic conflict, leaned toward Sella and spoke in a low voice. They held back, he said. That formation, those weapons, they were not fighting at full capacity. That was a demonstration. How do you know? Sella asked. Because every Voreth ship is still intact, Cho said. If they had wanted to destroy them, they would have. 11 minutes against 42 Voreth warships, and not one of them is destroyed. That is not the result of limited capability. That is a choice. Sella looked at the data again. She thought about the display she had seen in Earth's operations room. The dark shapes at the edge of the formation that Voss had not explained. None of those ships had even moved during the engagement. In the Vorath command station above Varda Prime, a signal arrived from the destroyed intercept fleet. Gron read the combat report 3 times. He stood very still for a long time. Sub-Commander Dreth, who had been studying human history for 2 years in preparation for this campaign, stood beside him and said nothing because there was nothing useful to say. Gron had built his career on knowing an enemy ceiling. He had always been able to look at a species and find the top of what they could do and then plan above it. He looked now at the report in his hands and could not find a ceiling. He opened a channel to Earth, not to negotiate, not yet, just to buy time, and asked to speak with their senior diplomatic representative. The response came from Voss directly. You have 72 hours to return our people and leave our space. After that, we come to you. The channel closed before he could reply. The 72 hours passed without a single word from Gron. He had spent them doing 3 things. First, reinforcing the ground garrison on Varda Prime with an additional 4,000 troops pulled from the nearest Vorath staging post. Second, mining the orbital approach lanes with deep scatter explosives that could blind sensors and crack hull plating. Third, sending urgent requests to the Vorath War Council for additional fleet support. Requests that the War Council debated for 60 hours before sending a holding reply that promised nothing. Graun understood what that reply meant. He was on his own. He told himself it did not matter. He had 4,000 soldiers on the ground, a fortified command station in orbit, and enough explosives in the approach lanes to shred anything that came through them. The humans would lose ships. They would lose soldiers. Eventually, the cost would stop them. Every species reached a point where the cost stopped them. At hour 73, Voss did not come through the approach lanes. She went around them. Earth's fleet curved wide around Vada Prime's second moon, a dead rock of iron and ice, and approached the planet from the polar axis, a direction the Vorath miners had not seated because no sane fleet attacked from there. The gravity math was complicated. The navigation window was narrow, and the margin for error at speed was almost nothing. Voss had run her navigators through the approach 17 times in simulation before the fleet moved. They came in clean. Not one ship touched a mine. What happened next in orbit lasted less than 20 minutes. The Vorath command station, which had been built to withstand heavy assault, found itself surrounded before its point defense systems could establish firing solutions. Earth ships had approached in a rotating formation that kept changing shape every 40 seconds, never presenting a consistent target geometry, never allowing the station's targeting computers to lock. The station's gunners fired anyway. They hit nothing important. Earth's return fire was precisely aimed at the station's communication arrays and external weapons mounts, not the station itself, not the personnel inside it. The station went dark and quiet, while its crew remained entirely unhurt. On the ground, Vorath General Paul received a transmission from orbit telling him the command station was neutralized. Then she lost all satellite communication because Earth had also, quietly, replaced the Vorath communication satellites with their own during the orbital engagement. Paul had 4,000 soldiers and a fortified perimeter around the colony's central district. He had expected to fight an approaching army from a prepared defensive line. What he got instead was something his training had not prepared him for. A 12. Earth dropships came down in 8 different locations simultaneously, all of them outside the city in the open farmland, all of them clearly broadcasting their positions. Paul watched his sensors and waited for the ground assault to form up at the edge of his perimeter. It did not form up. The soldiers dispersed, moved in small units, and disappeared into the terrain. Then the lights in the colony went on. Not fires, not weapons, electric lights, street lights, building lights coming back online across the whole district that Paul had been occupying. The Vorath had shut down the colony's power grid as a control measure on the first day. Now the power was back, restored remotely by Earth engineers aboard the fleet who had hacked the grid management system from orbit. With the lights came sound. Speakers across the colony broadcast a message in both standard Galactic and in the Vorath language, calm and clear. Civilian residents of Vata Prime, Earth forces are present. Move to the green-marked evacuation routes. You are safe. Lena Sato had been underground for weeks. She heard the message through the tunnel walls, a faint echo, and she recognized the tone of it more than the words. She gathered the 111 people she had been sheltering. The 41 children from the school had grown into a wider group over the weeks, and she led them toward the light. Colonel Ashford, still alive in the deepest section of the tunnels with 19 soldiers and a makeshift command post, received a direct signal from Voss through a secure frequency he had thought was completely dead. The signal contained 3 things: a map of current Vorath positions, a suggested route to the surface, and a personal message that said simply, "We have you. Come up when ready." He was ready immediately. The ground engagement, when it happened, was not a battle so much as a slow encirclement. Earth's small units moved through the dark farmland all night, cutting Vorath supply lines, disabling vehicle depots, quietly taking out communication relays one by one. They never struck the places where Vorath soldiers were concentrated. They struck everything around those places, until the 4,000 soldiers in the central district were standing in a circle of silence, cut off from supply, cut off from communication, cut off from orbit, with no clear picture of what was around them in the dark. By morning, Paul's soldiers had been awake for 30 hours, cold, hungry, and unable to raise anyone. They were not defeated. They were simply alone. Ashford walked out of a tunnel entrance at the edge of the market district at dawn. He was thin and dirty, and his left arm was in a makeshift splint. He looked at the city around him, at the lights that were on, at the sky that had no Vorath ships in it. A young Earth soldier came to meet him and offered water. Ashford drank it, and then asked for a communication line to Admiral Voss. When he reached her, he said only, "How many did we lose?" Voss told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "And then?" She told him that too. He nodded slowly, though she could not see it. "Good," he said, and meant it in the way that only people who have seen real war use that word, not with pleasure, but with the specific relief of a thing being over, without unnecessary waste. Paul surrendered at midday. His soldiers laid down their weapons in the main square where Gron had given his announcement weeks before. They were given water and food and medical attention before they were given anything else. Paul looked at the human soldiers processing his troops and could not find cruelty in any of them, which confused him more than the defeat itself. Gron was not on Varda Prime. He had taken his personal warship out of the command station 3 hours before it went dark, running under minimal power, trying to use the chaos of the orbital engagement to slip away unnoticed. He made it 11,000 kilometers before. The dark shapes at the edge of Earth's formation, the ships Voss had not explained to Ambassador Sela, simply appeared around him, as if they had always been there. His ship stopped. His weapons were offline before he touched the controls. Voss opened the channel. "Warlord Gron," she said, "you will be transported to a Galactic Concord holding facility. You will stand trial. You will be given a legal advocate and a fair process." She paused for a moment. "I want you to understand that the reason we are doing this, the trial, the process, all of it, is not for you. It is so that every species watching this knows the difference between what you did and what we do." Gron said nothing. Voss closed the channel and authorized the boarding team. The Vorath War Council met in emergency session for 9 hours and produced a statement in 12 languages that used the word regrettable 4 times and the word mistake 0 times. Earth read it once. Then Dr. Nadia O'Rell, who had spent her career studying how civilizations say things they do not mean, highlighted 6 sentences in the statement and brought them to Admiral Voss and Secretary Brennan. She did not need to explain what she had highlighted. The meaning was clear enough. The Vorath were not sorry. They were recalculating. The War Council had looked at what happened to their intercept fleet, at the fall of Varda Prime's garrison, at the capture of Grom, and had not concluded that they had done something wrong. They had concluded that they had underestimated the opposition and needed to revise their approach before attempting anything further. The statement was not an apology. It was a delay tactic dressed in careful language. Brennan wanted to believe otherwise. He had spent 30 years in diplomacy, and he had a deep professional habit of finding the version of events in which both sides were reachable by reasonable conversation. He sat with O'Rell's highlighted document for a long time. Then he authorized the blockade. Earth fleet did not cross into Vorath core space. That was the one line Voss had drawn herself without being asked. She would not send ships into the deep territory of a species that had not attacked those specific systems. That was not defense. That was conquest, and she had no interest in it. But the trade lanes that fed Vorath core systems from their outer resource territories, those ran through open space, and open space had no sovereignty. Within 72 hours of the blockade beginning, 14 Vorath cargo convoys turned back at Earth's picket line. The convoys carried processed ore from 3 mining moons, food shipments for 2 outer colony stations, and a medical supply run for a Vorath border settlement. Vass let the medical ships through. Everything else turned back. The Vorath economy was large and had deep reserves, but the reserves were built on the assumption of constant supply from the outer resource territories. The Vorath War Council had conquered those territories and built infrastructure on them, but it never built the kind of redundancy that would survive an extended interruption. Within 3 weeks, the manufacturing centers in Vorath core space began running short of raw material. Dreth had known this was the vulnerable point. He had written a report about it 3 years ago, a strategic vulnerability assessment that the War Council had marked classified and then largely ignored because its conclusion was uncomfortable. The Vorath Empire had expanded faster than it had deepened, and its core systems were dependent on a supply chain that ran through space it did not fully control. Dreth was not a reformer by nature. He was a soldier and a careful thinker, and he had followed the War Council's orders for 20 years without serious objection. But he had also spent 2 years studying humanity before the Varda campaign. And in that study, he had found something that the War Council had classified in a different way, not as a strategic vulnerability, but as an irrelevant cultural detail. Humans kept records of everything. Every colony attack, every first contact, every trade agreement, every broken promise. They had kept records across centuries of expansion, and they shared those records openly within their own networks. Dreth had accessed some of those records through neutral data brokers. He had found the accounts of the 11 species the Vorath had absorbed. He had read what their survivors said. He had noted the dates and the methods, and the way the War Council had, each time, framed the absorption as necessary development of underutilized space. He had also read an Earth historical record about a thing called the Nuremberg trials. He had spent a long time on that document. When the manufacturing shortages began, and the War Council started discussing escalation options, more ships, a different approach, possibly targeting Earth's own outer colonies to create asymmetric pressure, Dreth made his decision. He contacted 11 generals who had, over the years, expressed private reservations about the expansion policy. He did not tell them what he was planning. He invited them to a logistics conference on the second moon of Vorath Prime, which was a normal enough reason to gather senior officers. They came. In that meeting, Dreth laid out 3 things: the economic reality of the blockade, the military reality of Earth's capabilities as he understood them from 2 years of study, and the historical record of what happened to every empire that had reached this exact point. The point where continuing cost more than stopping and pride was the only remaining argument for going on. 7 of the 11 generals agreed with him before the meeting ended. The other 4 needed another day. On the 10th day of the blockade, the Vorath War Council was removed from authority in a quiet internal action that Dreth described to his staff as a constitutional clarification. The War Council members were not harmed. They were placed in a form of administrative suspension that the Vorath legal system allowed, technically, in cases of catastrophic strategic failure. Dreth had checked the legal texts carefully before using them. He then opened a direct channel to Earth, not through the Galactic Concord, not through intermediaries, but directly to Brennan's office on the orbital station. He identified himself, stated his new authority, and said 4 sentences. The Vorath Empire wants to stop. We understand the terms your admiral stated. We will comply with them. Tell us how to begin. Brennan took the call alone. He sat with it for a moment, which was unusual for him. Then he called Voss on a secondary channel. He sounds genuine, Brennan said. He might be, Voss said, or he might be buying time again. How do we know the difference? We don't yet, Voss said, but we respond as if he's genuine, and we verify everything. Generosity in tone, precision in execution. Brennan nodded. Then he picked up Dreth's channel and said, We will send Dr. Oral to your station within 48 hours. She will bring the full terms. Nothing is agreed until every point is confirmed in writing and verified in action. Dreth accepted without negotiation. In the Galactic Concord observation chambers, Ambassador Sella watched the communication logs as they came in with a delay of several hours. Around her, representatives from a dozen species were doing the same thing. Nobody was talking. The room had the particular quiet of people who are reconsidering things they thought they understood. The Davin diplomat Cho sat beside Sella and read Dref 4 sentences 3 times. They stopped, he said, as if confirming something he had not quite believed was possible. Earth stopped them, Sela said. Cho shook his head slowly. No, Earth showed them the cost. Dref stopped them. A Vorath general looked at what Earth had done and decided his civilization mattered more than the War Council's pride. He set down his datapad. That is what Earth's restraint accomplished. If they had simply destroyed everything, the War Council stays in power because it becomes a matter of survival and honor. Instead, they created space for someone inside to make a different choice. Sela thought about that for a long time. Then she began drafting the Conquered's formal invitation for the trial of Warlord Gron. She wrote it carefully because this was, as best as she could determine from 800 years of Conquered records, the first time a major empire's military commander would stand before an international body and answer for a war of aggression against a species that had survived to demand it. She wanted the wording to be right. It would be cited for a very long time. Gron's trial lasted 19 days. It was not the longest trial in Galactic Conquered history. That distinction belonged to a commercial dispute between the Gren Collective and an independent trading federation, which had run for 6 years and produced a verdict that satisfied no one. But Gron's trial was the most watched. Every species with Conquered access had their diplomatic missions present, and 14 species that had never previously engaged with the Conquered sent observers for the first time specifically because of it. They came, most of them, expecting to watch humans punish their enemy. That was the shape of things when a powerful civilization had won a war. The winner made the rules of the conclusion, and those rules generally involved the loser losing as publicly and completely as possible. What they watched instead was something different. Earth legal team presented the case methodically. The attack on Vata Prime, the lack of declaration, the civilian casualties, the occupation. They presented it with documentation that was so thorough and so carefully organized that Gron's own legal advocate had very little room to contest the facts. He contested the jurisdiction instead. Argued that the Conquered had no authority over military decisions made within Vorath strategic planning. This argument did not go well, partly because the Conquered's founding charter had clear language about exactly this kind of case. And partly because Dreth, now acting as the Vorath Empire's official representative, declined to support the jurisdiction challenge. He had agreed to the trial as part of the peace terms, and he honored the agreement. Gron was convicted on 7 counts. The sentence was not death. It was not torture or public humiliation, or the kind of punitive spectacle that would have satisfied the part of the audience that wanted satisfaction. He was sentenced to permanent residency in a Conquered detention facility in conditions that were secure but not brutal, with access to materials and communication under monitored restrictions. He would not be returned to the Vorath Empire. He would not be free. He would spend the remainder of his life in a place where every species he had ever dismissed as inferior could look at him through a viewing record and know that he had been held to account by the civilization he had called incapable. Several Conquered observers found this outcome anticlimactic. They said so. Dr. Nadia Orella, who was present for the closing of the trial, heard one of these comments from a Darvan trade representative in the corridor afterward. She stopped walking and turned to face him. She was not a large person, and she had a quiet voice, but she had spent her career studying how civilizations speak to each other. And she chose her words with the precision of someone who knows exactly what a sentence can do. The point of the trial was not to satisfy us, she said. It was to establish that this can be done, that a commander of a major empire can be held in front of an international body and made to answer for what he chose to do. We are not interested in revenge. We are interested in what comes after revenge. The part where it is harder for the next Grand to exist, because every officer in every empire now knows that winning is not the same as being right, and that there is a body that can tell the difference. The Divan representative thought about this for a moment and then said nothing, which was, Orella thought, the most respectful response available to him. The peace terms with the Vorath Empire were finalized in the same week. The Vorath withdrew from all non-Vorath space. Reparations were agreed, not ruinous ones, the kind that collapses a civilization's economy and breed the next war, but meaningful ones, structured over time, tied to verified compliance. The Vorath assault fleet was reduced by 60%, with conquered monitoring of the remaining ships. Dreth negotiated these terms with Orella over 11 days, and they were, by the end, reasonably efficient with each other. On the last day of negotiations, Dreth asked Orella a question he had been holding for some time. "When did your people know they could do this?" he asked. "Defeat us, I mean. How long have you been capable of what we saw?" Orella considered this carefully. "A while," she said. "We spent a long time not telling anyone how capable we were, partly because we did not want to frighten neighbors we were trying to build relationships with, partly because humans are, in general, more comfortable being underestimated than overestimated. When you are overestimated, you get challenged. When you are underestimated, you get time." Dreth absorbed this. "And the weapons we could not identify in your fleet, the dark ships. Those," Orella said and almost smiled, "are not part of this discussion." On Vada Prime, reconstruction had begun within a week of liberation. The colony's infrastructure was damaged, but not destroyed. The Vorath had wanted the resources intact, which had accidentally preserved most of what the colony needed to rebuild. Prefabricated housing came down from orbit. Power was restored in stages. The fields that had burned were turned and seeded again because the soil was still good, and the people who worked it were still there. Lena Sato was given a formal commendation in a small ceremony in what remained of the market district. She stood in front of a crowd of survivors and a small delegation of officials from Earth, and she held the commendation and looked at it for a moment and then looked at the people in front of her. She did not give a long speech. She said, "I just knew the tunnels. The rest of them kept themselves alive. All I did was show the way." Nobody who had been in those tunnels agreed with her assessment, but they understood why she said it, and they let her say it. Colonel Ashford was promoted to general and offered command of the new Vada Defense Force, which would be a permanent garrison rather than the small and underfunded one that had existed before. He accepted on the condition that the garrison include a proper early warning network covering the entire star system, which was immediately approved, and also that the colony school be the first building fully rebuilt, which was approved just as quickly. Admiral Voss returned to Earth. The reception that waited for her was very large and very loud, and she stood through it with the careful patience of someone who has agreed to be present at something, but would rather be somewhere quieter. She gave a short address from the steps of the Fleet Command building in which she said very little about herself and a great deal about the names on the casualty list. The soldiers and the colonists, the people who had died in the attack, and the people who had died in the liberation. She said, "We did not go to Vada Prime to prove something to the galaxy. We went because our people were there and they needed us. What the galaxy concludes from that is the galaxy's business." This was widely quoted. Ambassador Sella's final report to the Galactic Concord, submitted 3 weeks after the trial, ran to 400 pages. Its conclusion was one paragraph. It said, in the precise and measured language of diplomatic record, "The human response to the Vorture attack on Vada Prime was measured, capable, principled, and effective. This body has in past assessments classified humanity as a mid-tier civilization of limited strategic significance. That classification is hereby revised. Humanity should be understood as a civilization that has chosen, deliberately and consistently, to present a smaller profile than its actual capabilities warrant. The reasons for this choice are not fully clear. What is clear is that the choice reflects a sophistication of strategic thinking that this body has not previously credited to them. We recommend all conquered members update their assessments accordingly and engage with Earth's diplomatic representatives with the full seriousness that the relationship merits." She filed the report. Then she requested a private meeting with Dr. Aurel, which was granted. They met in a small conference room on the orbital station. Sela had brought her own tea, a Maran preparation that smelled faintly of copper and something sweet. Aurel had brought nothing but a small recorder, which she turned off when Sela asked her to. "I want to ask you something off the record," Sela said. Aurel nodded. "Those dark ships," Sela said. "The ones you would not discuss." Aurel looked at her steadily. "Is what you showed us during the Vorath engagement, that fleet, those capabilities, is that actually what humanity can do? Or was that also a smaller profile?" Aurel was quiet for a moment. The station hummed around them. Somewhere distant, a docking bay was cycling through its pressure sequence. "Ambassador," Aurel said finally, "I think the most honest answer I can give you is this. We have never had to find out what our actual ceiling is. We have never needed to." She picked up her recorder, confirmed it was still off, and set it back down. "We hope we never do." Sela walked back to her shuttle an hour later and sat in the pilot seat without starting the engines for a long time. Outside the viewport, stars moved slowly past as the station rotated. Somewhere among them was Varda Prime, its lights coming back on. Somewhere among them were Earth's dark ships, running silent, going wherever dark ships go when they are not needed. She started the engines. She had a report to update.